A lot of people think they have a money problem. They don't have enough, they can't save enough, they can't seem to get ahead no matter how hard they try. But here's what almost no one wants to consider. What if the problem isn't the money? What if the problem is the fear surrounding it? There's a simple test, one that doesn't involve your income, your investments, or your net worth. Watch what happens when you have a genuine opportunity to give something away. Not when it's convenient, not when you have extra. Right now, with what you have. What do you feel? If the answer is anything close to panic, a tightening in the chest, a sudden list of reasons why now isn't the right time, then this video is for you. We live in a world that treats financial caution as a virtue. Save more, spend less, protect what you have. And on the surface, that advice is completely reasonable. But there's a version of that caution that has nothing to do with strategy. It's not discipline. It's not wisdom. It is fear, wearing the mask of responsibility. Behavioral economists have a name for the psychological state that produces this kind of thinking. They call it scarcity mindset. And what's interesting is that it doesn't only affect people who are struggling financially. Research out of Princeton and Harvard found that scarcity mindset affects how people think, regardless of actual wealth level. It taxes the brain. It narrows focus. It causes intelligent, capable people to make decisions they would never make if they felt secure. And here's the part most financial content refuses to address. You can be wealthy and still be operating from scarcity. You can earn 6 figures and still feel like you can't afford to breathe. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that happens, what's driving it, what it costs you, and how something as simple and counterintuitive as structured giving can begin to rewire it. When we're young, giving is instinctive. Nobody teaches a child to share a laugh or offer a hand. At some point, something changes. We learn that resources are limited, that what we give is gone, that the world doesn't necessarily give back. And that lesson, while partially true, creates a mental model that can quietly sabotage the rest of our financial life. Here's the thesis of this video, stated plainly. Generosity is not primarily about the recipient. Generosity is a diagnostic tool for the giver. The way a person responds to an opportunity to give, the emotion, the hesitation, the rationalizations, reveals something precise about their internal relationship with money. It reveals whether they are operating from abundance or from fear. And that distinction matters more than almost any investment decision they'll ever make. Because the financial decisions a fear-driven mind makes are categorically different from the decisions a secure mind makes. Not just in scale, in structure, in time horizon, in the opportunities they can even see. Let's begin with what scarcity mindset actually is, because it is widely misunderstood. Most people assume it just means thinking you don't have enough. But the psychological reality is far more specific and far more damaging. In their landmark study, economists Sendil Molainathan and Eldar Shafir demonstrated that the experience of scarcity, whether it's a shortage of time, money, or social connection, actually reduces cognitive bandwidth. What does that mean practically? When the mind is preoccupied with scarcity, it loses the capacity to think long-term. It fixates on the immediate gap, the immediate threat, the immediate cost. It cannot hold the future with the same clarity it once could. This is why people trapped in financial fear often make decisions that look irrational from the outside. They refuse small expenditures that would save them money over time. They avoid investments because all they can see is the immediate loss. They hoard what they have, even when deploying it would generate far more in return. It's not stupidity. It's not laziness. It is a brain under siege, protecting itself from a threat that, in many cases, exists primarily in the mind. And here is the part that should genuinely alarm you. Scarcity mindset is self-reinforcing. The more you think from scarcity, the more you behave from scarcity. The more you behave from scarcity, the more evidence your mind collects that scarcity is the natural state of your life. It becomes an identity. In 1979, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky introduced a concept that would reshape how we understand financial decision-making. They called it loss aversion. The finding was this: the pain of losing something is approximately twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same thing. Lose $100, you feel it sharply. Gain $100, the pleasure is real, but roughly half as intense. That asymmetry sounds rational. In a world where resources were truly scarce, it would be rational. But we no longer live in that world, at least not most of us watching this. And yet, the brain hasn't updated. Loss aversion doesn't only affect what we do with money. It shapes how we hold it. People with significant financial resources are often among the most psychologically gripped by loss aversion. Because the more you accumulate, the more you have to lose, and the more your identity becomes attached to what you've built. This is the paradox that no one talks about. Wealth doesn't always produce security. Sometimes it produces the opposite. Because the person with nothing doesn't fear losing what they don't have. But the person who has spent decades building something, they know exactly what loss looks like. And that knowledge, unexamined, becomes a cage. Giving triggers loss aversion directly. It is the voluntary release of a resource, and the intensity of the discomfort that produces tells you precisely how tightly you are gripping. That is not a moral judgment. It is data. Here is what most conversations about generosity miss entirely. The benefit of giving is not primarily social. It is not primarily spiritual. The primary benefit, from a psychological and behavioral standpoint, is what it does to the giver's internal model of the world. When you give something away and the world does not end, when you release a resource and discover that you are still okay, your nervous system records that. It files it as evidence. Evidence against the core belief that scarcity mindset depends on, which is, what I have is all I will ever have. Neuroscience research supports this. Studies using fMRI imaging have shown that acts of generosity activate the brain's mesolimbic system, the same reward pathway involved in trust, social connection, and long-term motivation. But more important than neurochemistry is the behavioral pattern it creates. Every act of intentional giving is a small proof of concept. It proves that you can release control and survive, that the fear was larger than the reality, that your resources are not as fragile as the fear insisted. Over time, this accumulation of evidence begins to dismantle scarcity identity from the inside, not through willpower, not through affirmation, through direct experience. And here is what changes when the identity shifts. The person who once couldn't consider a long-term investment because the short-term cost felt catastrophic can now hold that discomfort. The person who avoided calculated financial risks because all they could see was the potential loss can now also see the potential gain. The time horizon expands. The opportunities that were always there, previously invisible, become visible. That is not a metaphor. That is a direct consequence of what giving, done consistently and intentionally, trains the mind to do.
Now, before you assume this video is telling you to give everything away, it isn't. And before you assume that generosity is always psychologically healthy, it's not. There is a version of giving that reinforces scarcity rather than dismantling it. It looks like giving from guilt, giving to manage how others perceive you. Giving because you can't say no, not because you're free, but because you're afraid of what happens if you do. That kind of giving is not generosity. It is obligation wearing the name of virtue. And it produces the same anxiety, the same exhaustion, the same resentment that scarcity thinking always produces, just pointed in a different direction. True generosity is characterized by one thing. It is chosen. Not pressured, not performed, not reactive. It comes from someone who genuinely believes that what they have is sufficient to share from. And if you cannot yet give from that place, that is important information. It is not a character flaw. It is a signal about where you are in your relationship with money. And that signal deserves your honest attention, not your shame. So what does this actually look like in practice? Not as a philosophy, as a behavior. The framework is this. Think of it as structured exposure giving, and the name matters because it comes directly from behavioral therapy. Exposure therapy works by gradually introducing a stimulus that triggers fear in a controlled and safe setting until the brain's threat response is retrained. Structured giving works the same way. You give a small amount, an amount that is real enough to feel, but not large enough to genuinely threaten your stability. Not to a charity you've never heard of, not in a grand gesture, to something specific, something you chose deliberately, someone or something you genuinely care about. And then you sit with discomfort. You don't rush to rationalize it. You don't immediately check your bank balance. You let the fear be present, and you observe that you are still okay. Do this consistently, monthly, if not weekly, and something begins to shift. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually the response to giving changes from contraction to something closer to neutral, and then eventually to something that feels closer to freedom. The brain is relearning what the mind always suspected, but fear kept confirming, that the flow of resources does not depend on your grip. The second practice is simpler. Whenever you feel the grip, whenever you feel the tightness that says, I can't afford to lose this, about money, about time, about an opportunity, write it down. Just note it. Not to judge it, to observe it. Because scarcity thinking thrives in the unconscious. The moment you bring it into view, the moment you say, I am feeling scarcity right now, and this is what it's telling me, its grip on your behavior weakens. You do not have to believe a different story about money overnight. You have to begin noticing which story you are currently living inside. Remember the question at the beginning of this video. What do you feel when you have a genuine opportunity to give something away? That feeling, whatever it was, is not a reflection of your wealth. It is a reflection of your relationship with the idea of enough. And your relationship with enough determines almost everything. It determines how you invest, how you take risks, how you see opportunities, how far into the future you can think when it matters most. The most financially dangerous thing is not a bad investment. It is a mind that cannot see beyond its own fear. Generosity, practiced with intention, doesn't cure that overnight, but it begins a conversation with that fear. A quiet, persistent, evidence-based conversation that nothing else quite replicates. Not affirmations, not willpower, not even financial education, because you can know every wealth-building principle in existence and still be paralyzed at the moment it matters if the underlying fear has never been examined. So here is the question I want you to sit with. Not act on immediately, just sit with. Are you holding your money? Or is your money holding you? If you're not sure, you already have your answer. And if this video surfaced something you weren't expecting to feel, I'd genuinely like to know